Hey guys, welcome back to the Discipline Life Podcast, the place where we talk all about power differential relationships and domestic discipline. I'm Aria, and this is my husband, Coda.
Hello, everyone.
And on today's podcast, we are going to be talking about how much ownership does a husband have over his wife's behavior. And this topic came to me because this week during a podcast I did exclusively for the patrons, I do a solo podcast over there. I talked about how a wife's behavior is a reflection of her husband's leadership. And in that podcast, I mentioned that a husband is responsible for his wife's behavior. And I started thinking about how much is a husband responsible for his wife's behavior? Like, how much ownership does he really get to take? Because a wife is still human. She still is autonomous. She still has agency. But a husband really does have a responsibility for his wife and for her behavior. So how much of that ownership and how much of that responsibility does he hold?
100% podcast over. No, I'm just kidding.
I only posed the question so far. Didn't give any
Just
type
kidding.
of perspective or answers.
I had to be the facetious one. That's all.
So what are your initial thoughts on this?
Well, I do think that first I have to say I agree with things that you just said about it from the standpoint that we have to remember that the wife is not this unfeeling, unthinking person that just is like a robot that is controlled or manipulated or anything like that. But she is a free-thinking, feeling person, and as such, that means that she, believe it or not, has thoughts of her own, and is responsible for her own actions, and she can make decisions, obviously, and so there is. And we can, because I don't want to go as far as talk percentages yet. You know, I'm a kind of percentage guy, so we might want to get there. But I do think that we can't out of the gate say that the husband is 100% responsible for the, how did you put it, the behavior or the actions?
I said behavior, but I feel like those are interchangeable.
Of his wife in the relationship. Now we could go into further, although I want to wait, about what percentage is he then responsible. So all I'll say so far is that he is responsible to an extent for her behavior.
I don't think that a husband should own his wife's behavior as far as, he does not take the accountability for her behavior. However, he is responsible for how he responds to that behavior.
Right. Sorry. I think that's what I meant was that, he can't, we're all, human beings and adults. And so even Arya, I think, would agree that she is responsible for her actions. But depending on what those actions are, too, that can potentially come back on me, depending on what they are and when they happen and who they happen to and all of those kinds of things.
Which is why I did that solo cast for our patrons to talk about how, as a submissive wife, it is a big responsibility to remember that your actions are a reflection of your husband and his leadership, and they can at times affect your husband. Your behavior and your actions
Absolutely.
Can affect your husband. And if it doesn't affect him directly, it can affect other people's perspective of who he is as a man, who he is as a husband, and who he is as the leader of your home.
Perfect example that I was thinking about when Arya suggested this topic. I don't know what it was like for some of you growing up, but one of the positive things and my parents did a lot of good, so I don't want to sound one of the positive things my parents did, but because they did do a lot of good. But one of the positive things is that from a very young age, I can remember if we went to someone's home, they wanted me to. My dad would always turn to us and say, "I want to hear yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, please, thank you, all of those kinds of things." Because they didn't want us to just learn how to be polite. They also knew that our actions, and of course we don't realize this till years later, till we become parents or we get older, right? But they didn't want our actions to also come back and reflect poorly on them. And my dad was somebody who was a respected entrepreneur and businessman in our community and in our, I was born and raised in the church. And so he was very active in our church. So was my mother. And so he wanted us to be, we weren't preachers' kids, but we were pretty close, and so he wanted us to have to show respect and to be respectful because he knew all of those things would reflect poorly on him and my mom. And that's not the only reason. I'm not saying that should be the only motivation, but that is part of the motivation. And so the same thing I think is here is to remember start there that your actions, just as Aria just said, reflect either poorly or they reflect really well on your husband, depending, if you're in public and how you present yourself and all of those kind of things. They either reflect well or poorly on him. And sometimes, too, that doesn't necessarily happen behind closed doors, but the same mentality should be the same. And I'm sad to say, as a kid, we didn't always return that respect to our parents either.
And I think that that's a good caveat into that. As a wife, we should be treating our husbands in public and private in a respectful and uplifting way that reflects his leadership and his position in the home and over us. Sometimes I think that it can be a bigger temptation to be very respectful, very obedient, very demure in the home, and then not have that same attitude and mentality when interacting with others around.
Yeah, and to me, that's almost just as important in what you do, again, behind closed doors and in the home. Because again, not that I'm very careful when I say this, because there is a point that we need to care about what people think, and then there's a point that we don't. There's got to be a healthy balance here, because there are going to be some people that don't agree with the domestic discipline lifestyle. But, however, in this case, whether they know that or not about your relationship, we have met folks, and of course I'm not going to name any names because I can't think of anybody off the top of my head, but there have been times where I have been turned off on a person or a husband because of the way his wife behaved. Like, oh my gosh, like I was really liking this guy, and then his wife behaved so badly, so rudely. I don't want to get together with him again, because then that means I may have to get together with his wife and him and drag my wife into that. And I just don't want to do that because she did such a bad job representing him.
Well, and I was going to say, too, that can not only affect social situations, but job opportunities. There's so many different aspects to how a wife's behavior reflects on her husband. Now, I would say that the vast majority of the time that women who are submissive, who want to be submissive, who want to honor their husbands, they are not intentionally treating their husbands poorly. They are not wildly out of control in general. However, part of a husband's responsibility is to hold his wife accountable to her behavior and to lead her and show her what is acceptable, what's not acceptable. So that kind of gets into how much responsibility does a husband hold for his wife's behavior? Like, that is the question. Like, where does a husband's responsibility lie? And how much ownership of her behavior does he assume?
Exactly. Well, obviously, we want to just kind of set the table, set the stage before going further in this question.
Yes, that was called a segue.
And so getting into the heart of that, because it's a domestic discipline relationship, again, I'm not going to say he owns 100% of it, because that's not fair. Because, again, as we had just established, she is a free-thinking human being. She's not property. She's not owned. She is a free-thinking person. Oh, you were going to interject something.
I was. Just the way you kind of used the example of being a kid.
Right.
I don't think anyone today would look at a child misbehaving and automatically blame or assume the parents are bad parents, but they're going.
I would hope not. I would hope not.
But they're going to look like if a child is running wild or having a tantrum in a public place, even if I don't know the parents, I'm going to look and see, what are the parents doing? How are they responding?
Correct.
And I think that because even as parents, we don't control our children. We don't decide their behavior.
So true.
But we do get to decide how we respond to it. And I think that the same is true between a husband and wife.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because those of you who have any childs that have special needs or behavioral difficulties and stuff, you know what that's like as parents. It's hard.
Or a condition called 2-year-old.
Yeah, right, exactly. Any of that kind of stuff. And so because we have been through that, and also because we have a daughter that fits one of those descriptions, we don't ever look down upon parents when we're in a restaurant or something like that their kids are doing that. Like Aria was saying, we look and see how they're responded to. If they're just dismissed, that's kind of a problem. Or the opposite is true. If we see, oh my gosh, like that child really was throwing a tantrum and it could have been dealt with pretty easily, but that parent just went way overboard with the discipline. You know what I'm talking about. You've seen that. It's the same thing in a domestic discipline relationship. I think that the husband needs to be very, very careful that how he reacts. And maybe am I jumping too far ahead here?
I don't know.
Okay. Catch me if I'm jumping too far ahead. He needs to be very, very careful, because, yes, people potentially are watching how he's going to respond to it. So the first way over on the pendulum thing is to do nothing. Just let her behavior run wild, which if you're in a domestic discipline relationship, that's probably not going to work. That's probably not a good idea.
Well, can I interject real quick?
Yep, that's why I said to go ahead and interject.
We are not equating a wife to a child.
No.
The dynamic is completely different, and I would not. I hate to say, like, oh, well, if a wife is, behaving badly, I'm going to look and see how her husband responds, because I wouldn't really, honestly. We're only using that because that's somewhat of a societal example that we can kind of look at. But in domestic discipline and in adult relationships, most of this should be handled privately.
Right. When I say, sorry, thank you, let me clarify. When I say I'm going to look how her husband responds, what I mean by that is that me personally, I'm not going to necessarily judge that relationship and go, well, wonder how her husband's responding. What I mean is that if you're in a domestic discipline relationship, you need to be going through in your mind, okay, how is it I'm going to respond here? And to respond by doing nothing is probably not the right way to respond to that.
And there is somewhat of a picture of dynamics that you can see publicly too, because like I feel like we've all been in those social circles where the wife is just loud and boisterous and the husband just like laughs it off, or he's like, oh, that's just her, or he, you know, I've even seen husbands that just look defeated by how
That's really sad to see. I've seen that a lot.
how loud and
Yep.
boisterous and over the top their wives are. And I've seen wives that are, you know, passive aggressively manipulative, and how husbands respond to that just in a defeated way. And so
Body language tells you a lot.
It does.
sometimes.
It
really
does.
does.
but if you are in a relationship where the husband is assuming that leadership, then he's not going to respond that way. To a certain extent,
He shouldn't. Yeah.
right. And I would say, like, you know, if a wife is kind of getting a little out of line and her husband comes up and just, you know, makes physical contact with her, maybe puts a hand on her shoulder, holds her hand, just kind of, and then she shifts gears, that's a response of like, oh, okay, I understand what's happening here. I understand what I'm doing and I need to shift gears here. And, you know, even if he just kind of whispers in her ear and she shifts gears, or she excuses herself and they go off together. Because the last thing you want to do is make a public spectacle of what's going on.
That's the other extreme that I was going to say. The first pendulum is to do nothing. The second one is what you should never do, regardless of where you think her behavior is at the moment. Don't ever make a public spectacle and embarrass her. That's not okay.
Not only does that embarrass her, that reflects poorly on you.
It does, absolutely.
And it
absolutely.
potentially puts a target on yourself socially as being an abuser.
Yes, very much so. Even if you're not one.
And then she's going to start getting social pressure to, you know, talk about your relationship more. What was that about? And she could even start getting social pressure to, you know, behave more inappropriately in the relationship, you know, potentially end the relationship because of other people's opinions on that one interaction.
Or worse, you know that there's always that person that thinks it's their job to stick their nose in your business, and not saying if you do it the right way, as Aria just described, where you come and you either grab her hand, put your hand on her shoulder, whisper in her ear, and you guys go off. Sometimes those people are going to interject their opinion and their selves into your relationship either way, but you're definitely going to invite it if you make a spectacle, and that person is going to decide, well, I think it's my business to go ahead and interject myself into the relationship. And so you just open that door wide open for them to be able to do that, and draw conclusions that maybe are not even true.
And if your wife is feeling hurt and embarrassed because you made a public scene, you embarrassed her in front of her friends, family, whatever it may be, and then she's getting, you know, these people in her ear saying, how dare he do that? Like, why is he treating you that way? He shouldn't be doing that. That's abusive. She's more inclined to believe it when she's already in a negative headspace from the interaction because of what you did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so this goes back to what we've said to many, many times on the podcast, but it's good to reiterate again. That is a dictator doormat mentality, which is not what domestic discipline is for, and that is not how domestic discipline should be carried out. Never is it the dictator and the doormat scenario. And if you make a spectacle, whether you mean to or not, that's what it's going to communicate. Oh, he's the dictator, she's the abused doormat, and that's how he treats her. So now we can go into the healthy side.
Well, and I think we kind of talked about it to where, you know, the healthy side of not allowing your wife to behave erratically in public, not allowing your wife to behave in a way that is unbecoming of who she is, who you are, what your relationship's about, is accountability, ultimately.
Yes. Now, well, again, let me know if I'm jumping too far ahead. But now, when you do the appropriate thing, as Arya just described, and you pull her aside, you didn't make a spectacle, but you did something, and you pull her aside. Now is still the time when you're behind closed doors, whether that's back at home or whether that's in this separate room that you excuse yourself to, whatever it is. Now is still the time to not be that dictator. You still have the ability to control your emotions. Doesn't mean that you maybe are not firm and you don't put down, remember, and remind her you just broke a rule, or you're teetering on breaking a rule or whatever, but you don't have to fly off the handle. You don't have to be disrespectful or ugly or I'm losing the other word that I was thinking about, but you get the point.
Demeaning.
Demeaning. Thank
Okay.
you. That's the word. And demeaning, because again, I may have reiterated this too much, but I think it's important. She is still a human being. She is still someone who deserves to have her own free thought, all of those different things. And she is somebody that hopefully you claim to love, which is why you're in this relationship, and why you're doing domestic discipline in the first place is to help her, not to hurt her. And so if you believe all of those things, this is still a time, but even behind closed doors, to be loving and kind. But even in that situation, if a rule has been broken or she's teetering on breaking a rule, to be firm. Again, not be ugly, but be firm and hold her accountable to the rules.
Well, and I was going to say, you mentioned earlier that a husband is not 100% responsible for his wife's behavior because she does have the agency to choose her behavior.
Yep.
However, he is 100% responsible for his behavior, his response
There
to
it
her
is.
behavior.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Exactly.
And so, to that end, I would say that he is responsible to not allowing her behavior to go unnoticed.
Yes.
And unchecked. And he is responsible to hold that accountability.
And then, and in holding that accountability, following through. Because, yeah, it's great to remind and say, oh, yeah, don't forget the rules, but you have to follow through with those. Don't be afraid to follow through. Now, again, we've said maybe in the moment, especially if, let's say, I'm just going to throw out a scenario here. You had a company party and you have to pull her aside, and maybe you can't leave yet. Maybe the boss hadn't shown up yet, or there's still people you got to mingle with. They're still part of the evening, so you can't follow through with a punishment, perhaps yet, with a rule that she's broken or anything. But you have to have this idea of, okay, you broke this. We still have to be here. I expect the behavior to change from this point forward. But I will follow through when we get home. You will be punished for X, Y, and Z.
And it can be appropriate that if she doesn't change her behavior in those social settings where you still have to, interact with people, if she's not able to change her behavior and you have to pull her aside again, it can be appropriate to say you need to go wait in the car.
Yes, absolutely. And is it okay if I use the example you came out with me this week? And we're good.
Okay.
So this week, Arya came to a school event that I was participating in as one of my classes. I asked her to come, and she she was great. Obviously, she did a great job in being a wonderful, supportive wife, and came off as such. And she was very supportive the entire time, very encouraging to me, even afterwards. And that was a perfect example, though, of her. But we didn't have this conversation again. I want to emphasize that I didn't treat her like a child. It wasn't like we pulled up in the parking lot and then I turned to her and said, okay, now you remember the rules, right? And you remember how you're supposed to talk and you remember how you're supposed to do this. No, I know she knows it, and I know that she knows how to behave because she's an adult.
And part of that is representative of the fact that this is a well-established relationship.
Correct.
It's a well-established dynamic.
Yes.
This isn't our first rodeo.
But you would... I don't think this would happen because I don't think you ever have done this. Correct me if you think I'm wrong. But if something would have happened where I felt like you were being inappropriate, you knew that I would put my hand on you, or again, I would whisper in your ear and we would go off into a private area and talk about it. Or we would leave if it was at that point.
Right. Yeah, I know that you would address it in some way, either that way or in the past. Sometimes if I'm starting to veer off a little bit, you'll just come in and kind of overtake the conversation so that I can step back. That's another way that you have tried to, rein me in a little bit.
Yeah. But there, and so the point of bringing this up is that the thing that I didn't do, because this is where it gets into the point where I'm not going to be a micromanager again. There was never a point that by the time we walked through the doors of the venue that we were at that I went, okay, now this is how you're supposed to say things now. This is how you're supposed to behave. I want you to act like this. I want you to do that. There was never that.
No, and I feel like that, again, is because we have this well-established dynamic within our relationship. And that has not been an issue for me.
It hasn't, but I'm saying if it could have been for somebody else, I still don't know if that's the right response out of the gate.
Well, I was going to say, I just kind of thought about this as we're talking now, that this is one of the ways that you can use maintenance spanking.
That's true. That's a good point.
That if you are going into a situation that your wife has struggled with before, and there are strict behavioral standards that she has failed at before, been punished for before, you can give a maintenance spanking before the event to have that conversation of, this is what I expect. This is how you're supposed to behave.
That's so true.
This is what I need you to do. And you give a maintenance spanking as that reminder that hopefully she will not have to have a punishment for inappropriate behavior after the fact.
That is a very good
However,
point. Very good point.
If she fails, even with the maintenance spanking, you still follow through.
That's right. Exactly. But no, that was a very good point that that didn't even dawn on me either till you had said that. But yeah, that's exactly what that's for. Yeah.
And I would say too, like, even if you have to like kind of touch her shoulder, touch the small of her back, hold her hand, whisper in her ear, and you don't pull her aside, but she's able to shift gears. She's able to kind of cue in like, oh, maybe I need to rein it in a little bit. Still follow through with the conversation afterwards. Say, even if you're like, hey, I'm proud of you for acknowledging my leadership there. And, you were kind of getting close to crossing a line, but you didn't. Even if it doesn't warrant a punishment afterwards, still kind of have that follow-up conversation.
Yes, that's what I was going to agree with you. You still need to have that conversation. But don't do exactly what Aria just said. Like, if there were good moments where she caught herself and she pulled herself back, reiterate, yeah, you were getting close there, but hey, I want to give you props. You didn't cross that line, and that's good. Give the compliment where the compliment is needed and warranted, just if there is also a warning that needs to be given in that same scenario. Whatever you need to do in that scenario, do that. But again, do it respectfully, do it with kindness, but don't be afraid to be firm. You can be firm with people. The problem, we talk about this all the time, the problem sometimes in our society is we think that being nice is the only way that we can be kind to people. No, you can be firm and kind to someone. And I think that's one of the issues that we have in all relationships sometimes is that we've mistaken nice for every situation. And I'm not going to go get on my soapbox about that, but I'm just saying there's a way for you to conduct yourself with your wife that allows you to follow through with the rules, to follow through with your with a domestic discipline relationship as the person that is trying to hold her accountable to the rules, without being demeaning, without being mean, but also and being kind and being firm and holding her to what you have established. So
well said.
Thanks. I don't get those very often, so I actually speak English today. So,
So I feel like we've kind of talked through all of that. So I guess at the end of the day, a husband is responsible for his wife's behavior as far as he is responsible for how he responds and how he leads his wife's behavior.
Yes, but and that's why I kind of did a clickbait on you guys. I'm not going to give a percentage because I don't think a percentage can be given here. He is responsible for everything Aria just said, but at the end of the day, she is a free-thinking human being who is responsible for her own actions.
She chooses her behavior, but she
exactly
also
right.
chooses to accept the consequences of that behavior.
That is correct.
Whether that is a positive reinforcement for doing a good job or a negative consequence for failing to represent her husband properly.
And so that's what I think what a good balanced relationship looks like, is that the husband takes his responsibility for that part of the relationship, but the wife realizes that she holds responsibility as well and takes accountability for that as well.
Now I'm going to bait next week's topic
Oh,
just a
no.
little bit.
Everybody's like, no, don't bait us.
But I think that we've talked a lot about being together with your husband in mixed company. However, there are many social interactions that a wife is without her husband.
Ooh.
And
I think I know where you're going with this.
So next week, I think we're going to delve into the topic of should a wife self-report her behavior.
Ooh, that's good. That's good.
And so I think that it's important here to touch on that even when your wife is outside of your presence, you still need to check in with her and see how things went and kind of have a follow-up conversation to give her the opportunity to self-report if she feels like she was inappropriate and needs to be corrected for that.
Very good. Oh, man, you got them baited now. They're not going to want to wait. They're going to want it now.
But I think that's a good topic to delve into.
That's a great topic.
It definitely deserves its own podcast. Like,
definitely.
We do not have time to give that topic justice right now.
Not today. So, but we hope this was helpful and informative. This kind of came out of, like you said, your solo podcast. And you said, hey, I think I can expand on this a little bit.
And if you want to hear that solo podcast, you can click the link down below to join our Patreon at the $5 or $10 a month levels and to get access to that.
It's awesome. And again, thank you to all of our patrons that already give to this. We appreciate so much how you've supported us, and we hope that we're continuing to bring you the content that you love.
But if you're looking for a way to support the podcast without joining Patreon, giving this podcast a like and subscribing to the YouTube channel always helps. We really appreciate that.
Yep.
And click the bell to be notified when we upload new content.
And we also, for those of you who might have missed it, if you're currently listening to this on YouTube, there is a video version of this available to Patreon.
That's right. We offer a video version of the podcast to our patrons at that $5 and $10 a month level.
Yeah, so if you want the video, go over to Patreon.
Thanks for joining us today, guys. I hope you like this discussion, and we will talk to you next time.
See you later.
Bye.